In December 1978, a crew of hardened New York gangsters executed what was, for its time, the single largest cash robbery in the history of the United States. The setting was not a bank, but the cargo terminal of one of the world's busiest airports. The take would surpass every expectation, but the true story would not be about the money. It would be about the men who stole it and how their own ambition, greed, and paranoia tore them apart in the bloody aftermath. I'm Joker, and tonight we're going behind the mask. This is the story of the Lufthansa Heist. It is not a tale of clever gadgets or flawless planning, but of violence, raw ambition, and the fragile, brutal bonds between men who lived by a savage code. At its center stood one man, charismatic killer with a velvet glove and an iron fist, James Jimmy Burke. James Jimmy the Gent Burke was a paradox that defined his era in the New York underworld. His greatest handicap was also the source of his relentless drive. His blood was not purely Italian. In the rigid traditional hierarchy of La Cosa Nostra, this single fact meant he could never become a made man, an official sworn member of the Mafia. He would forever be an associate, a powerful, respected, and feared one, but an outsider nonetheless. This exclusion from the inner sanctum forged Jimmy's character. He understood that in a world governed by titles and lineage, his currency would have to be something more visceral, absolute, unwavering fear, paired with a reputation for immense generosity. He cultivated both with ruthless precision. From his teenage years, Burke was known as a proficient and cold-blooded hitter. He carried out assassinations for powerful bosses without hesitation or visible remorse. He was a student of violence, learning that its true power lay not just in the act, but in the reputation that preceded it. If you crossed Jimmy Burke, you died. It was that simple, and everyone knew it. Yet, on the streets of his Queens neighborhood, he was Jimmy the Gent. He tipped with $100 bills, not 20s. He paid for surgeries for neighbors' children, covered rent for struggling families, and ensured the wives and children of imprisoned crew members wanted for nothing. This generosity wasn't merely a disguise. It was a strategic tool. It built a wall of loyalty and silence around him. People owed him. More importantly, they liked him. Who would believe the man who paid your grandmother's hospital bill was also a stone-cold murderer? But beneath the affable surface was a predator. His real passion was not murder, but theft. He saw robbery as the purest, most dignified form of criminal enterprise. Extortion was a slow, grubby tax. Drug dealing was messy and attracted the wrong kind of heat. But a well-planned robbery, it was a surgical strike, high reward, low profile, and over in minutes. Jimmy loved the planning, the execution, the score, and his favorite hunting ground was the sprawling, chaotic, cargo-rich labyrinth of John F. Kennedy International Airport. If Jimmy Burke was the general, Henry Hill was the eager recruit who dreamed of becoming a soldier. Henry's introduction to the life was not through family, but through geography. As a boy in the 1950s, he lived across the street from a cab stand that served as a front for Lucchese crime family operations. To young Henry, the men who ran it weren't criminals. They were kings. They commanded respect, wore fine clothes, drove Cadillacs, and never waited in line. They lived outside the rules that constrained his working-class father. At 13, Henry began running errands for them, parking cars, making deliveries, acting as a lookout. School became an afterthought. Why study history when he could live it? His hero was Paul Vario, the Lucchese captain who ruled the neighborhood with quiet, formidable authority. Under Vario's loose supervision, Henry graduated from errand boy to a participant in minor crimes, learning the trades of theft, hijacking, and intimidation. Henry was sharp, observant, and possessed a fierce desire to belong. He was also, crucially, non-Italian, which meant he shared Jimmy Burke's ultimate ceiling in the Mafia world. This created a natural kinship. When Jimmy took Henry under his wing, he saw something valuable, not a fearless enforcer like Tommy, but a smart, adaptable, and fiercely loyal operator. Henry wanted the life, the status, the money. He was willing to work for it, and he understood the chain of command. For Jimmy, that loyalty was more valuable than brute strength. Completing the trio was Thomas Tommy Two Guns DeSimone. Where Jimmy was calculating and Henry was eager, Tommy was pure volatile force. He was of Italian descent and thus had a path to becoming made, but his temperament made him a terrifying liability. Tommy's violence was recreational, explosive, and utterly without restraint. He killed as easily as other men cursed. He would fly into a homicidal rage over a perceived slight, a bad joke, or even a poorly timed glance. He was known to laugh while beating a man senseless. Even other gangsters, men who lived with violence daily, gave Tommy a wide berth. He was the nightmare scenario, a sanctioned killer who couldn't or wouldn't turn it off. Jimmy Burke, however, saw Tommy's utility. In the controlled environment of a robbery or a planned hit, Tommy's sheer terror factor was an asset. His presence alone could paralyze victims. He was fearless, brutally effective, and crucially, obedient to Jimmy. Jimmy was one of the few people who could calm Tommy's rages or direct his fury. In Tommy, Jimmy had a perfect, terrifying weapon, as long as he could keep it aimed in the right direction. The Lufthansa heist was not Jimmy's first score at JFK. In 1967, a tip from a corrupt airport worker led Jimmy, Henry, and Tommy to a much simpler but highly lucrative target, the Air France cargo office. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. The worker provided a wax impression of the key to a secure room where currency exchanged by American tourists in Europe was stored overnight. Dressed as civilians, Henry and Tommy walked into the cargo building during a shift change, used the copied key, and walked out with a bag containing $420,000 in cash, over $3.5 million today. It took minutes. No guns were drawn. It was a ghost operation. The success was intoxicating. It proved their method, an inside man, precise timing, and swift, silent execution. It also reinforced the system. A significant cut of the money went upstairs to Paul Vario, the capo who allowed such operations in his territory. Everyone got rich, and no one got hurt. For Jimmy, it was proof of concept. The airport was a vault waiting to be cracked. He began to dream bigger. For over a decade after the Air France job, Jimmy's crew operated, did time, and lived the life. Henry married, had children, and secretly branched into the highly profitable and highly forbidden cocaine trade. Jimmy continued to mastermind robberies, but the big one, the legendary score, remained elusive. The catalyst arrived in the form of Werner, a Lufthansa cargo supervisor at JFK. Werner was in deep to loan sharks due to a severe gambling addiction. Facing maiming or death over his debts, he offered his creditors something more valuable than cash: information. Werner revealed the airline's most sensitive secret. Several times a month, Lufthansa flights from West Germany arrived at JFK carrying millions of dollars in U.S. currency. This wasn't traceable bank money, it was mixed, untraceable cash from European currency exchanges destined for American banks. The cash would arrive late at night, be secured in the airline's high-security vault inside Building 261 at JFK, and be picked up by armored car the next morning. On certain days, especially around the Christmas season, when transatlantic travel and currency exchange peaked, The haul could be staggering, $5 million, $6 million, even more. Werner provided everything: shift schedules, guard rotations, the number and names of employees on the midnight shift, and most critically, the precise security measures protecting the vault. The vault had a dual lock system requiring two keys turned simultaneously by two different managers to avoid triggering a silent alarm. Werner's information was a criminal goldmine. It didn't just point to a target. It provided a complete step-by-step blueprint for its takedown. The plan was handed to Jimmy Burke, who immediately recognized its potential. This wasn't just another score. This was the score.
So the Lufthansa cargo is here. We hit it at 3 a.m.
And the guards?
Jimmy moved with the precision of a general preparing for D-Day. He assembled a hand-picked crew of 10 men. The criteria were strict: no drug addicts, no loudmouths, no weak links. Notably, he excluded Henry Hill from the robbery team itself. Henry was knee-deep in his own cocaine business and was already drawing police scrutiny. Jimmy wanted no extraneous heat. This decision would ironically save Henry's life. The plan, built on Werner's intelligence, was methodical. 1. Strike time. 3 a.m. on December 11th, 1978. This was the scheduled meal break for the Lufthansa midnight shift. Most employees would be upstairs in the third-floor lunchroom. 2. Entry. 2 teams. The main team, led by Tommy DeSimone, would enter the front of Building 261 and secure the employees. A second team, in a stolen black van, would circle to the isolated rear cargo entrance. 3. Control. Swiftly and quietly subdue and restrain all Lufthansa employees. Find and isolate the shift supervisor, the only person with the second vault key. 4. The vault. Force the supervisor to open the dual lock system, avoiding the silent alarm. 5. Load and escape. Transfer the contents of the vault to the van via the rear cargo door and vanish into the pre-dawn darkness. A separate car with Jimmy Burke would act as a scout and counter-surveillance vehicle. The emphasis was on speed, silence, and psychological control. Gunfire was to be avoided at all costs. The operation unfolded with an almost surreal smoothness. The crew, disguised with ski masks, breached the building. Tommy DeSimone's team found the employees exactly where Werner said they'd be, in the lunchroom, eating. They were handcuffed, threatened, and told that their families would be harmed if they resisted. The terror was absolute and effective. The lone supervisor was lured from his office with a fake emergency call and immediately seized. Under the barrel of Tommy's gun, he was marched to the vault, with the crew holding their breath.
All right, turn them, now!
He turned the 2 keys simultaneously. A heavy door swung open. The sight that greeted them was beyond their wildest fantasies. The vault was packed. Neat stacks of cash filled shelves and boxes. Jewels and unset precious stones, also in transit, glittered from other containers. It was a pirate's treasure. The initial estimates of $2 million were shattered on sight.
Get it all, we gotta go. Almost got it, watch the door.
They worked frantically, stuffing everything into large bags and loading them into the waiting van. In under an hour, they were gone. The final tally was staggering: $5 million in cash and $875,000 in jewelry, for a total haul of nearly $6 million. In today's money, that's over $25 million. It was, by a wide margin, the largest cash robbery in American history. The robbery itself was a masterpiece. The aftermath was where the story descended into a Shakespearean tragedy of greed and paranoia. Jimmy Burke knew the greatest threat to their security wasn't the police, it was each other. He laid down a brutal law: no spending, No showing off, no talking. The money had to cool off for years. The crew, however, was not made of such disciplined stuff. Faced with life-changing wealth, they cracked almost immediately. One member, a low-level hustler named Stax Edwards, was tasked with destroying the stolen van. Instead, he parked it in front of his girlfriend's house, where it was quickly found by police, providing the first major break in the case. Others made even more flagrant mistakes. They bought new Cadillacs, expensive fur coats for their wives, and flashy jewelry. They threw money around in nightclubs. They talked subtly to friends and mistresses. The sudden wealth of known low-level gangsters was a beacon to law enforcement. Jimmy Burke watched this unfold with cold fury. Every new car, every drunken boast, was a nail in their collective coffin. He had orchestrated the perfect crime, only to see it unraveled by the stupidity of the very men he trusted to execute it. And Jimmy Burke had a very specific final solution for loose ends. What followed was a systematic purge that would become as infamous as the robbery itself. Believing that dead men tell no tales, Jimmy Burke began eliminating everyone directly or indirectly connected to the heist who he deemed a liability. Stax Edwards was the first to go, murdered for his incompetence with the van. Joe Bud, the crew member, who had liaised with Louis Werner, was shot dead in his car. Louis Werner himself, the inside man, was spared only because he was already in police custody, singing to the FBI. At least 6 other associates connected to the robbery or the subsequent spending spree were executed. Bodies were found in car trunks, dumpsters, and vacant lots. The methods were brutal. Shootings, stabbings, strangulations. Jimmy was wiping the slate clean with blood. But the violence wasn't confined to his own crew. It also consumed his closest ally. The fate of Tommy DeSimone. Tommy's past caught up with him. His murder of William Billy Benfina, a made member of the Gambino family, years earlier was a grave violation of Mafia protocol. When the Gambinos discovered Tommy was the killer, they demanded blood from the Lucchese family. In a cruel twist, Tommy was lured to a fake ceremony, celebrating his induction as a made man, the very honor he craved, and was executed on the orders of the mob hierarchy, likely with the approval of his own capo, Paul Vario. The most feared killer in the crew died betrayed by the institution he wanted to join. Jimmy Burke's undoing was not the Lufthansa heist, but the heroin trade. In direct defiance of Paul Vario's rules against drug dealing, which attracted relentless federal attention, Jimmy dove into narcotics. It was a fatal error in judgment. The FBI, already investigating the Lufthansa case, caught him on drug charges. While in prison, on those charges, the dam finally broke. The key witness who could connect all the dots was the one man Jimmy hadn't been able to kill, Henry Hill. By 1980, Henry Hill was a mess. His cocaine business had drawn police raids. He was addicted to his own product, paranoid, and deeply in debt. He also knew too much about the Lufthansa cleanup murders. When Jimmy Burke, suspecting Henry might flip, set up a suspicious meeting that Henry believed was a death trap, Henry realized his only way out was through the one door no gangster is ever supposed to take.
It wasn't me, I swear. I didn't do anything.
He became a federal informant. In a stunning series of testimonies, Henry Hill laid bare the inner workings of the Lucchese crew. He detailed the Air France robbery, the Lufthansa heist, and most damningly, the subsequent murders orchestrated by Jimmy Burke. His testimony was the final piece of the puzzle for prosecutors. In exchange, Henry, his wife, and his children entered the Federal Witness Protection Program. He vanished, given a new name and a new life, forever looking over his shoulder. A king of the underworld transformed into a ghost. Jimmy Burke was convicted of the 1967 Air France robbery based on Hill's testimony and received a 20-year sentence. He was later implicated in multiple murders connected to the Lufthansa cleanup. He died of cancer in prison in 1996, never having tasted true freedom after his greatest triumph. Paul Vario, the Lucchese capo, was convicted on racketeering charges, aided by Hill's testimony, and died in prison in 1988. Henry Hill lived in hiding until his death in 2012. His life story became the basis for Nicholas Pileggi's book Wise Guy and Martin Scorsese's iconic film Goodfellas, which immortalized the story, but as Henry himself noted, could never fully capture the sheer terrifying reality of it. The Lufthansa heist remains officially unsolved in many respects. Only a small fraction of the money was ever recovered. Most of it vanished, spent, buried, or laundered beyond recognition. The true legacy of the robbery is not one of glorious victory, but of a profound, gritty truth about the criminal world. The greatest heist in American history was not undone by a brilliant detective or a failed alarm. It was destroyed from within by the very human flaws of the men who pulled it off. Greed that made them unable to hide their success, paranoia that turned them against each other, and ego that convinced them they were untouchable. They stole a fortune, but in the end they paid for it with their freedom, their loyalty, and their lives. The Lufthansa heist proved that in the underworld, the most dangerous thing you can steal isn't money, it's your partner's trust.